Awesome. Welcome to the podcast, Nicole. Thank you for joining us. This series is focused on media masterminds. So folks like yourself who have built massive media presences within the VC and tech ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And so for those who don't know you, I would love to start off with your background and basically tell us a bit about Wischoff Ventures.
Sure. Yes. So again, really excited to be here. So Nichole Wischoff, a solo GP at Wischoff Ventures. We are a pre-seed and seed dedicated fund. In some cases, we're leading, that's usually less often, and then oftentimes co-leading or collaborating with other early stage firms. In terms of focus, North America focused, and I put it in, 4 buckets. So money, financial services, movement, supply chain logistics, manufacturing, and marketplaces. Our sweet spot being, B2B. So we're about 90% B2B focused.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, as you know, this podcast is focused on media, and a big part of Wischoff Ventures now is your media presence. And it's clear you spent a lot of time building that audience across various different platforms. And so I guess the first question I have for you is you're on your fund 2 of Wischoff Ventures, and you've tweeted publicly that that media has been a massive firm building strategy for you. And so my first question is, what is the role it's played in building Wischoff Ventures, and particularly as a solo GP?
Yeah. I'll go back to the beginning of it because it wasn't planned, and I would definitely not call it a strategy. Now I'm leaning in, but at the time, the expectation wasn't to go to Twitter, which is where this all started, and build something big on behalf of the brand. So in 2021, end of 21, a friend of mine who's an angel investor, I just closed my first $5 million fund, and I was still operating. So I come from the operating side. And I had never used Twitter. I had an account maybe from college, never logged in, and was never online. And especially operating, like it was a huge distraction. I can't even imagine trying to help build companies and being, online. And we'll get into why that's different in venture. So I was never on, didn't pay attention to it. And so I think one of my first tweets was announcing the closing of a $5 million fund, and then had a few bigger accounts kind of like, retweet me and say, you should follow Nicole. But to me, and I think this is probably the right way to build an audience looking back, one, I never expected to get followers. So I had no expectations of the platform. And I very authentically, and still try to maintain this, have just built a brand or built the firm publicly through Twitter exclusively. So it was just Twitter for about a year and a half. And then TikTok started to get interesting. And I think I saw a couple 20 VC on there. And then I was noticing, though, in parallel to some of the business channels on TikTok, I was noticing these very, girly get ready with me's, but I was seeing the massive growth in audience around this authenticity. Like, let's spend 60 seconds talking about our day, what we're learning, or maybe an area that I'm specialized, or maybe I'm just talking to you about, being a 33-year-old woman in Nashville. And was like, what if we married that and just try to just extend, our current channel, which is Twitter. Twitter took off. And I think you'd made a comment, that Fund 1, I didn't really have an audience. So while I announced I maybe had 100 followers, and by the time I raised Fund 2, maybe I had 20,000, I'm not sure. So what's happened has been interesting. Pre-Twitter following and social media following, I did notice more organic word of mouth referrals to founders. So in terms of deal flow, again, I wasn't pouring fuel all over this. I had a full-time job at a startup, and so it was very passive. However, current founders were talking about me. Other VCs I had met would talk about me, and there's frankly not a lot of angel investors. So it was, and I was known as that was a small fund, so anyone can fit in a $150K check. I got invited into everything. And so I never really cared about trying to build, something that was a bit more consistent. And then going at this full time, I left operating in March of 22. I thought, shoot, I'm going to have to maybe rethink this, right? Like, this is the full-time gig. How do we 100x the current deal flow? And how do I speed up? Like, organic word of mouth, referrals are amazing. That's the best compliment. But how do you expand that reach as far as possible, as fast as possible? And that's been what social media has done.
Got it. Okay. And I know you started at 2,000 followers at the top of 2022 on Twitter, based on your tweets. And now you have an audience of over 126,000 across all platforms, with 75K on Twitter alone. And I guess the question to you is diving a bit into the fund more, now that you are on Fund 2 with a big media presence. Has it shifted your LP construction at all?
I was very nervous. So about LPs and social media. And I would love to unpack that. And I think it would take some LP feedback. I always ask. So a fear I had is that a lot of VCs, older VCs that have been around the block for a while, they grew up in this Tiger Global culture, coach, you stay offline, no social media. I realized that from like the hedge fund perspective, you can't actually talk about a lot of things, but you weren't big and you weren't loud, in terms of PR, media, you name it. And I think that trickled down. So a lot of the industry was very quiet, offline, and also very white collar and exclusive. And so for a long time, also, there were much fewer firms. I think people had heard of the Sequoias and the Kleiner Perkins because they were one of a handful of amazing firms that had been around for the longest, which if you read the Power Law, you get the whole history like pretty quickly. And so I don't know that I think that there was so little capital to go around that like everyone knew of the few players, and therefore there likely wasn't a need for this kind of distribution. Fast forward to now, domestically, there's probably 3,500 pre-seed and seed stage firms in the United States, in the US. And so it is really hard to, just to stand out. And so what's been really interesting on the LP side, I will admit, outside I have Sindana Capital as an anchor in both funds. They've been amazing and very supportive. But outside of having them as a fund of funds that have anchored, I have a lot of family offices. So I don't really have any institutionals yet, which I think is where, the rubber meets the road on this topic. I will say that the older VCs giving me feedback is be careful because it's really easy to get canceled with one tweet and one message. What I will say is over time, I've really put in some rules for myself, using platforms, which is frankly, no politics and no arguing. Those are my big ones. I think you get into a lot of trouble. I think there's a place for that. I'm super happy to collaborate and disagree and all of that in person, but I don't think that being online and like pounding my chest about things is like the right way to go about handling, disagreements. And I think that's where things get, a little crazy for other people I've seen. I try to be responsible. I will admit, though, I don't think I've ever told anyone this. Like, there was a week where I deactivated my Twitter account raising Fund 2. I was so paranoid. I was like, I'm never, I'm meeting LPs. I was probably 50% closed. And I just kept thinking like, and the market had crashed simultaneously. And I was assuming that it wasn't the market. It was just me. So for about like 5.5 days, I deactivated it. I didn't want to, it was like, maybe this isn't it. But I will say, everyone has been really supportive. LPs have reached out to me and a lot of distribution from TikTok saying, I love that you have an opinion. Yeah. So TikTok's been the weirdest surprise to me, but everyone says there's been this resounding, we love that you have an opinion on things that, deals, markets, different things, even venture in an industry. And, it's a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of, the other stuff we might read. And it's made me stand apart. But again, the big unknown is as I'm increasing fund sizes and I'm getting bigger LPs, it's sort of still a question mark to me in terms of like, what's the appetite for someone who's a bit more online?
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because I think we're entering this new phase where, previously people didn't have massive audiences online, right? So it is just like an entire shift in the industry. And so it's curious, like we'll see what LPs respond, like how they respond, right? Because now there is a decent amount of GPs who are going to have online presences, for better or for worse, right? And so I guess you touched on this a bit in your response there, but I'm curious, from the LP side, we spoke about, but now when you're thinking about media in terms of sourcing and portfolio value add, you tweeted out in December of last year, send at least 15 cold DMs on LinkedIn per day to founders or potential candidates to work at a portco. 95% response rate, majority convert to a phone call, shoot your shot. And so my question to you is, how do you utilize media, not on the fundraising side for yourself, but on the side of, I guess, sourcing the best deals and the best founders. And then how do you convert that into helping those founders?
Yeah, so it's I just did have my first annual partner meeting, and I was trying to coming up with like the perfect flywheel visual of like you build distribution to have the opportunity to have access, right? And I think, and then once you have that, you're able to distribute your own companies in ways that are, whether it's customers or new hires or things like that. And I can kind of break that apart, but it's kind of created itself. So what's unique with pre-seed and seed, and what's been helpful for me getting leads or people reaching out, is that you don't find them, they find you, right? There's no market map where I live. Like there's no, like I can't go pull up like the hottest AI, if they're on a market map, I'm too late. And so the hard part is these people are underground. A lot of them don't put building something new on LinkedIn. I'd say like 90% don't do that. And so what you really are hoping for is that they find you. And what better way for them to find you than to talk about their market on Twitter and how excited you are, or, different areas. I think the Unisquare Venture folks have been great at this. They push out all their thesis-driven content, and then people find them like, hey, this really aligns with what I'm building and where I'm going. And you're relatable from that perspective. So for me, I've really leaned in largely because there's no market maps. Like they have to find me in a lot of cases. And so I can't find some of them. On the flip side, so in terms of just flywheel and funnel, a lot of it is me continuing to put my opinions out there, build the distribution, and then figure out how it's going to work in my favor, which doesn't happen to be in a lot of ways. So one, jacking the Twitter following count to up to 75,000. I think TikTok's close to 34, LinkedIn almost 20,000. I try to post consistently. And so with that now, I would say my access and ability to get allocation in competitive rounds is way higher than it was in Fund 1. One, my reach is way bigger. And two, what's been fascinating is even if a blue chip like a Sequoia is leading around and I DM a founder saying, hey, I think I'm late here, but I heard there's a round coming together, they almost always say, wait, I know you. Like, I feel like I know so much about you already. Like, let's get on a call. Like, we don't have much left, but I'd love to, to meet you and figure something out. And that is unbelievable. So from the founder's perspective, it's been unreal with getting allocation and access to deals that I would have had no business getting in. In Fund 1 with no social media, I was just like every other GP or firm that's offline, even if I have a strong background, even for folks with way better backgrounds than me and have sold companies for $1 billion, to a founder, they're like, okay, like, that's cool, but they don't really know that much about you. And so they don't really care as much maybe, when it push comes to shove and there's not that much, allocation left. On the other side of this, let's say once we have, companies in the portfolio, the value is tremendous in a number of ways. The first is, to your point, like when I reach out to folks on LinkedIn, I'm trying to match make co-founders or any of that. People are like, Nicole, wait, I love your Twitter. Like, yes, I want to meet you. What's the company? And again, would not have happened or as frequently in Fund 1. I'm able to find them first customers. So TikTok has been tremendous for first customers. So I will TikTok about a portfolio company. Hey, here's what they're building. Here is who they're serving. If you happen to be a general contractor in these states that are doing up to 15 million a year in revenue, like let me know. And then overnight, I have 30 good leads that I'm sending to my founders. And I do this consistently. So it's also other VCs knowing about them. It's design partners. It's a co-founder matching. Like I just am doing that now with what my newest portfolio company. So it's just this flywheel of taking advantage of distribution on both access to it and then post-investment. How do you add value to them?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've had a similar experience to you, and Andrew Chen actually did a talk on this, and he mentioned, because he has a large media presence as well, and he was saying that media creates a false sense of closeness. So the way that it helps you in networking is that people feel like they know you, even if you've never had a conversation. And it helps you get into rounds. It helps founders get on the phone with you. They want to talk to you because they feel like they know you. And they really don't, right? And so that's like what the power of media has done for me. And it seems like it's done the same for you. And I guess, I think you touched on this earlier in the conversation, which is being online as a VC is different to being online as a founder and an operator. And so I'm curious how you talk to your founders about building a media presence. Do you tell them that they should use it as a strategy? Do you tell them don't focus on it? It will distract you. I guess, do you have any thoughts around that?
I do. I don't know that anyone, so I fundamentally don't believe that if you're a founder, you should be trying to get Twitter famous. I think it's a huge waste of time. I also don't use it for that. I use it just because I'm building a business and I'm building it on the back of a free like online platform. For founders, most of the strategy that I'll talk to them about, or my associate, is how do we distribute the brand? How do we think about go to market? So much, especially if a lot of my companies serve offline industries, these blog posts or podcasts actually really help. And so or case studies, like how do you get those in their hands? They're not like some of these guys you can't even find in a phone book if you could find one, and so a lot of it is just making sure that they're finding case studies or talking to someone that might be using the product. And a lot of it is the strategy around the business accounts, not the personal accounts. I'm not a huge fan, especially if you're early stage, like, sure, if you're Series D and you have an executive team and you've got some more time on your hands because you've spent the last 8 years grinding without support, then I totally get it. Like, have a great time. And I love what Ryan said at Flexport, and I learn a lot from that. I think very rarely do I see founders using it though for their companies. I think it's just like their thought pieces on like random stuff. I think that's sort of a waste, to be honest. For me, which I think is also the other part of it, so it doesn't actually take me that much time, which I know like you had a question there on that. For me, so Twitter, I don't have any drafts whatsoever. I literally tweet on the go. I don't save anything. I do delete like sometimes every other, depends, because I go back and read it and I'm like, maybe we should have thought about that, or like, so sometimes I'll delete stuff because I really don't plan it in advance. And I try to tweet once a day. I don't always have something to say. And then some days I have so much to say. So I try to stick to one a day. Same thing for TikTok. TikTok takes literally 15 minutes to do one. I don't have any fancy equipment. I look at my face and I talk, and then I learned how to do a little bit of editing. And I've just been trying to keep these as lean and light as possible. Sometimes the content, I'm always like, what am I going to talk about? So my associate's been really helping me prepare for a lot of that. But this stuff takes me maybe 30 minutes a day in total across every platform. So it's not that hard for me, but maybe it comes naturally. I'm not sure, but I'm never like, what is our plan, this week? It's not that big of a priority to me.
Totally. I'm similar to you. I don't really have tweet drafts. It's sort of like what's top of mind. And if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I haven't quite cracked video yet. So I don't know how you do that. We're gonna talk about it later in the conversation, because I'm a words girl, and even like Twitter, the character limit, I need it. But that's interesting regarding founders. Do you think that founders who have more of a media presence within the VC community have an easier time fundraising?
I think that people should, and I say this to my own founders, they should know about your company, but they shouldn't know everything about you personally, right? So if you're using your Twitter to talk about your favorite pizza in San Francisco, you know what I mean? Like, it's like stuff like that where people will just tweet constantly about random stuff. Like, I don't know that matters. What I do think is important is if you're using it to talk about your milestones, if you think it's going to help you with hiring, and maybe you're celebrating making like new hires and welcoming them to the team, I think you can just as easily build your business's brand, make the announcement around your fundraising, start talking about a lot of these highlights around your brand, so it feels like it's coming from a team perspective. VCs will find you that way as well, right? And so I think you could keep, pushing that out as the founder, but I think the business accounts are what's important personally.
Sure. And I also think there is a delicate balance that I've seen of not sharing too much online, keeping it a bit of a mystery. Right. So it's enough to get somebody in the door, but you don't want to be sort of blasting out your milestones, because I do think it becomes a disadvantage at a point if you start not meeting the milestones, or you start slacking a bit on the business side, because now you've become such a media presence that they expect when they meet you that the business is going to be there. Right. So I do think that there is a bit of a game to be played when it comes to building a startup versus being on the VC side. And I guess shifting gears a bit here, because we've spoken about TikTok quite a lot, and I don't have a TikTok presence, and I haven't quite broken into that realm of things. And so I'm curious what you use each platform for and what each platform gives you in return. In my mind, I'm shocked to hear some of the things that you've said about TikTok, because I always thought it had a younger audience. So I thought it would help maybe, you don't invest in consumer, but consumer businesses, right? Gain an audience in sort of that viral word of mouth capacity. So I'm curious, you're on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Talk to me about how you utilize each platform and what each gives you.
Yeah, again, in the beginning, if you talk to like Sahil Bloom or Austin and Morning Brew, those guys like came into social media and Twitter in 2020 and really like hacked the algorithm and like knew how to go viral. I do not care at all about that. So I don't know what goes viral. So on Twitter, the goal is just to be out there. I'd say what I get the most from that is that some credibility. Like I think a lot of people know who I am. They start to get really comfortable with like my style. Some may not like it. I think ever since I got over maybe 25,000 followers, there's just a lot of bullies, like anon accounts that are super mean. That was like hey, build a backbone, Nicole, get over it. That took me a little while. And then I just block pretty religiously. And then TikTok so it's been very interesting. So the demographic, they're good with analytics. You can kind of see who follows you. I think the average age that follows me is anywhere from like 18 to 40. And I am largely, and I think it's closer to 70% male. So a lot, and I chat largely business. So venture, I chat deals. I never do a get ready with me. You couldn't pay me. I just chat. I'm like, I don't even really wear makeup. Like I wear so I was like, this is the thing. But, and so I just chat deals and stuff. I'm learning kind of what works and what doesn't. What's been really interesting is that even people that know nothing about the industry will comment and say, I want to learn more. I'm noticing based on when I talk about LP stuff or raising a venture fund versus raising money for a startup, I feel like the responses are 50-50. So I think that my following is largely 50% other VCs or maybe LP focused and then 50% founders. What's interesting is most don't DM me on TikTok. They find me on LinkedIn. And I will have some of the craziest LPs reach out to me and say, hey, I run this massive single family office for like a very famous person that you know. I love your strategy. I love the approach. And also I feel like I know you and there's trust built to your point. Can we meet? And I get those like 3 times a week. So a lot of the TikTok, but I talk about, I'm like, hey, look, like I'm looking at this deal or here's something I hated in a pitch today, or like you really get into the weeds. Something I wanted to do to see if it would work transparently is sometimes with Twitter, like, people would comment and say things like, oh, she's a narcissist or oh, this or like something crazy, or VC brags would dunk on me, every week if I didn't block them. And so I was confused by that. I'm like, I'm just being authentic. Like I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying what's happening. And TikTok has helped a lot with that, where if people follow me on both, I'll get feedback that they're like, you're really humble and you're really relatable. And TikTok has really helped bring a voice and a face to Twitter, where sometimes Twitter can seem really intimidating to people. So TikTok has sort of demystified the Nicole of Twitter, which is like, oh, she's just a normal person that wakes up and has coffee and like works, and that's been really helpful.
Interesting. I'm still shocked by the LPs being on TikTok. I can't even get over it. Like in my mind, I was like, LPs are on LinkedIn. Like that's what I thought, right? I thought, okay, TikTok will be younger generations, junior VCs. Like I had no idea. So go figure. But I guess like when I think about it, my parents are on TikTok. So I'm like, that generation is on TikTok.
They are. And, I think it's probably not for work purposes, but then I bet someday if they talked about venture, I just happened to pop up. A lot of people are like, you found me, Nicole. I didn't find you on this app, like in it. And so after this, I'll actually send you screenshots of some LinkedIn examples, but like I probably get, it's amazing. I had 3 this morning, like I just from really great family, again, a lot more family office related, but like still, like I think that's a great outcome.
Does it also vary by size? Or do you, like in terms of the LPs that are on TikTok, I guess, or is it all varied?
So the stuff where they've come out of the woods anonymously is sometimes. So I remember doing an LP construction when I announced Fund 2 and I closed it. I literally did an LP construction TikTok, and I was like, here's the breakdown of the types of LPs and the dollar amount from Fund 1, and here's how it grew or decreased by those stages as you're growing fund size into Fund 2. And there were some like big institutionals that wrote in the comments anonymously, like, they don't have a name, but they were like, I represent a, like $30 billion plus like asset manager. And I actually agree with what you're saying, but they are anonymous. I don't know who they are, who they work for, but sometimes when they feel like they need to be a part of it, they'll respond and say who they are, like, or what they represent. And so there's some pretty big folks that are poking around, which is kind of weird, but they're
interesting. Very interesting. So I guess what I also want to talk about is social media or media in general is the first step in a lot of ways, right? You can have a large media presence, but there has to be sort of infrastructure and processes on the back end to manage all the deal flow, manage all, the LPs that reach out to you, manage all of sort of maybe the potential customers for your port codes, et cetera. List goes on, right? And so as a solo GP, what infrastructure do you have in place that basically allows you to deal with the influx of traffic that you get from the media presence, right? Because I see this on my end too, where it's like, it doesn't take a lot of time to tweet per se, right? So it takes maximum 30 minutes to an hour of your day. But then you have to deal with it. So talk to me about how you prioritize those inbounds and then sort of, what you do after social.
So I will admit that I am a work in progress on this, and it is not perfect. And I was actually earlier today talking to someone a GP at a big multi-stage, and even she was saying they don't really have any infrastructure whatsoever for all of theirs. Like they use Affinity, but barely, and there's just not a lot of structure. And I was shocked by that. So when I first started out, I didn't really have an intake form whatsoever. And so I think some people would find me on LinkedIn, and it wasn't as dramatic. When things really started taking off and I opened my DMs on Twitter, my DMs were insane. And so for every DM in the beginning, I'd probably get 2 or 3 messages, and then it grew with my following. And now if I tweeted about like industrial tech and said something interesting, I guarantee I'd get 30 to 50 DMs, 10 of which I'd probably want to talk to on the phone. And so it's a lot. I will admit that I can't even get to it. So I prioritize, there's obviously warm inbound. So friends in the network, other VCs doing deals, my founders whom I love, or other operators sending me deal flow, that is constant 24/7. So I have like 3 from this morning. And so that I prioritize number 1. And then 2 is like the entire cold bucket. So I finally got a website and then have an intake form. And there are probably, I think, 3,500 so far this year or something like that come in through there. That pushes to Airtable. And then I get an email from Airtable. I admittedly have never really looked at it. Sometimes I go through and I scan it, but I don't have as one person, I was like, I don't really have the time. And then it caught up with me because a few months ago, I met a founder that was raising her seed, had raised her pre-seed 8 months before. And I was like, gosh, I wish I met you at pre-seed. And she said, funnily enough, I actually submitted my deck to you at pre-seed. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to manage this. Like I have to fix it. And so LinkedIn, I think even right now I can check, I think there's 4,100 like invite requests. Like it's constant. And it's LPs, it's everyone. So if they don't leave me a note, I just can't look at it. Like I've tried to accept a lot of them, but then I see their stuff and I'm like, I don't want to do that. And so right now what I'm trying to do, and I have my associate doing, is every day she took over the Airtable. And so she will look through everything at the end of every day. She'll send a note to me and say, I think we should prioritize these 2 deals. They upload the deck. So that's great from one perspective. 2, all the emails I get from everyone for deal flow, I always forward to her immediately and say like, what do you think? Or can you help me so that it's top of mind? And then I have her put everything in the Airtable. So the only thing that's still awkward is LinkedIn, because she's not in my LinkedIn. So she's not seeing a lot of that, but at least trying to clean up the Twitter mess. Twitter's a mess, like my DMs, prioritizing what comes in through the website and then prioritizing what comes in through email. And then, as you know, everyone texts you deals, which is like so painful because I lose them. I'm like, where did they go? I have 120 unread texts at all times. So it's not even that. So I'm always on, but it's just so much. Like it's just constant. So again, great problem. So far it's been Airtable. I have not found Affinity to be very helpful to me. I think it's annoying to use it. So we're trying to create, I think I need to create more automation, of course, but right now it's not great is the short answer.
And I sort of expected that to be the response, because every single person that I've spoken to has not quite managed to figure out how to deal with all of the inbound that comes with all of this. I mean, myself included, my firm included, right? It's like we have an Airtable inbound form as well that helps with managing. We have more people on the team, right? So there's juniors who switch on and off looking at that form. And we get probably a similar amount to you, which is an overwhelming amount, right? And it takes hours on end to go through it. We do. But I think that's the side of media that people don't talk about, right? Where it's like sometimes you do get the things that slip through the cracks, right? Where it's like, oh, you reached out to me. Damn, like I wish I saw that. And so I think I haven't quite figured it out. It also doesn't help that it's not aggregated to one platform, maybe a startup idea, because I find it really difficult to go from text to Slack to Twitter DM to LinkedIn DM. Some are messages, some are like connection requests. Like it's just overwhelming. And so, I mean, I guess like the next question to you would be, do you have any structure around how you prioritize who you get on the phone with?
So until I hired my associate, I took obviously every first call, and I took a lot of those. And then in Fund One, I met everyone. And because I was a little bit more of a generalist than I am now. So that means Web3, healthcare, I was taking every call that I had no business taking. And then I was like, wait, I can't sustain this. This is like, you could take 100 calls a day if you did every category. Like, it's just not sustainable. And so really, it's really forced me to get more narrow every day, right? That I do this job. I'm like, no, it's so specific what we do. And so now I have a lot of guardrails, which is like a long list of what I don't do. So it's easier for me when someone sends me a deal to suss it out. I'll see a deck, I'll read the blurb, I'll follow up with a few questions just to make sure that I'm not looking at it incorrectly. And then try either, if I'm not sure and I'm like, maybe that there's something there, I'll have my associate take the first call. If I see something that I'm like, there's something there that's so interesting, strong team, a market I really like, an area I've been focused on, I always take that first call. So I've gone from probably taking 15 first calls a day now to taking maybe 3 to 5, and then having my associate help me pick up the slack. Because also, as you know, it's not sustainable. Like Zoom is fatigue is like, I was like, I will burn out if I was trying to continue to do that.
Totally. And I guess I just have a question in terms of, has media shifted your perspective in terms of what industries you focus on, what founders you're looking for, or anything of the sort? Or are you pretty strong-minded in what you want to invest in? Do you read other people's posts and you're like, that's interesting?
I certainly think a lot of things are interesting, but I'm very curious. So I'm like, what do people think about? Like, what are they excited about? Why are they excited about it? Media doesn't sway my opinions at all. I think if you're only living by what you're reading in the media or in the news, you are too late. So, I mean, even oftentimes, even in our own industry, like I'll know about news that the information writes about like 3 months later. I'm like, that happened 3 months ago, so I think if you're relying on that, you're already late. Like, I think if you're like, a lot of great growth stage firms were thinking about chips before Biden passed the CHIPS Act, before all this stuff with ChatGPT, so there's a way to be very thesis driven based on just research and like, reading books and staying on top of, hey, here are the top GDP drivers in the United States. Like, where are these industries going? Is there opportunity here? And then reading as much as you can. But if I let media kind of dictate the thesis, I would be so late. I would be like, it would just be a really, really, really bad strategy. Like, I think you have to already have, like, I've spent so much time in construction and I'll tweet about it, but like I've been at this for, 3 or 4 years now. And I think I think it would be a bad strategy to follow that.
It's a lagging indicator on what's already hot, right? I actually spoke with an HBS professor, and he was saying he knew sort of the boom in startups before the public did. So for example, he could have told you a year before AI became big that AI was going to be big, because he said all his students were talking about it, right? The same thing with sort of Web3 and blockchain. It's like media, and even when VC picks up on it, it's already, a laggard, as opposed to like talking to students or maybe founders who have been operating in the space for a while. So that's definitely a hot take.
I remember tweeting about pretty recently, I was like, it's been such an interesting week. Like, I was talking to this, it was like, DNA testing for dairy cattle. It was this YC company, and I was tweeting about it. And then I was like, in one day you can learn about like fertility testing in dairy cattle, about like using hydrogen to make gunpowder, this, that, and the other. And everyone was like, that all seems like all over the place and off thesis. I'm like, no, it's actually a way that I form my thesis for future funds. If there's new kind of frontier stuff going on, I think it's good to pay attention to it if it's not on my radar. And so I try to be a student. And to your point, I travel every week for a reason, because when you're boots on the ground and you're at these dinners, small dinners, and you're talking to people and you're like, what are you excited about? Or what are the best tools that you started using? That's going to be way more of a signal than anything I'm reading about in, the Wall Street Journal. And so that is where I'm literally eyes and ears on the ground, asking a lot of questions. And if there's something frontier related, I want to dig in and say, going into Fund 3, like, should I be shifting my industrial focus to maybe include some of this like defense stuff, because there's all this stuff going on. So I just try to, I'm definitely not a follower. I don't care what people are like, oh my God, like all the AI buzz. I'm like, cool.
Cool. Yeah. 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 You're like, did everybody see what happened to Web3? You're like, and here we are again.
It's just like, no, and I'm disciplined on price. I'm like, I'm not there's no herd mentality. I hate that. So it's just noise.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And so I guess the last thing I want to touch on here is you've been talking about your associate a lot, right? And so I know that was a recent hire for you. And I'm curious, your associate currently has quite a large media following, right? And you actually hired her from being on her podcast. I was also on her podcast. And so I'm curious your view, if you have one, on hiring folks with a big media presence now that you have one and your firm has one, and how it maybe differs having a media presence as a junior versus someone who's a GP or a founding GP.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought too much about that. Or the latter, part of that. I think, so something that I really needed the most immediate help with was the influx of deal flow from these channels. And then also, how do I maintain it and keep the quality when there's so much going on? And hopefully we're growing in fund size and all of those things. And so how do I do all of that? And something that LPs do want is me to hire. And so how do I find someone that can kind of do everything? So while her title is associate, she's sort of like everything, right? Like she is like a mini me where wherever she's like, hey, I've got this. Like for the summit, I could not have done without her, from us ordering stuff on Alibaba and Etsy and like hot gluing it together, or like just she now curates for TikTok a script, and she's like, here's the strategy for TikTok, like Monday theme, Wednesday theme. People need to know what to expect from you on TikTok, and so here's your strategy. So I don't even have to think about TikTok because before it's easy, but it saves me even more time. Twitter is still mine, but sometimes she's like, hey, a good piggyback for a good tweet is on your LinkedIn. So like she just kind of manages me and is like, here's maybe what we missed. So while it's associate, you think maybe just deals, it's so much more than that. And I really need help with that. And so someone that understands and has their own following, how to tell stories, so it's a big part of our job and our founder's job. She also, a big part of what she does is she works with the portfolio companies on how to tell their story. How do you tell it when you're hiring? If you're a pre-seed stage fund and maybe you only have one other person, you have no customers, how do you get a really good engineer? How do you announce your seed round in public? And then what channels do you want to make sure that you're leaning into based on your customer type? So she's really strategic. And that was important to me because for some of my portfolio companies, social media is their go-to-market. So it's how she can really, really help there. Moving forward as the firm gets bigger and I can even afford to hire more people, it'll be a bit more structured, but this is a startup, right? I look at my $5 million first money, and I think that was my pre-seed. And then I have a $20 million, or maybe my seed round, like the little like test it out. And then my $20 million fund is my Series A, where it's like, hey, we have something here. Can we figure out how to scale it? That's exactly how I view the firm. And so making your first hires for that. And then she's a generalist, if you will. And then her and I will kind of have our own lanes, or she will with other teammates moving into the future.
I mean, I also think particularly as a solo GP who is on fund 2, you've been able to build out the brand, but having a second person who also has a pretty big presence doubles sort of your efforts, right? As opposed to starting from zero with a new hire. And I like how you went into the detail of your associate helping with the storytelling of your portfolio companies, right? Because we do that as well internally. And so it's interesting. Do you have any, and I sort of am digressing a bit, but do you have any stories around how you've helped one of your founders and with media and it's come back in a very positive light? Did they was it talent intros? Was it customer intros? Was it, because I guess our founders ask this quite a lot as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. A lot of it I've sort of done for them. So like sometimes because they're still so young and they're still in stealth a lot of the times, I'll do a TikTok and say, hey, I have a company that is pre-seed that has raised $3 million, and give like an overview without saying who they are. And that obviously keeps them quiet in terms of the founders and the team, and then put out a request and like see, great results from that. I don't know. I'd say I have one company, Checkmate, that's a consumer company that's really broken out from Fund 1. I did the pre-seed. They are now on the Series A, and I'm a board observer. and they have really used TikTok to their advantage, but it's consumer. And so for that, it's kind of like, that's your distribution. Like you pay for that, it's expensive and that's the model. And so now what they've been doing though, which I love, is now the founders are coming out and saying, here's how we built 1 million followers on TikTok. And here's how we've gotten to 500,000 followers, and kind of creating the playbook for like, if you're like us, we can get there. What's been great for them is I'll have people reach out to me and say, hey, I saw Harry's post. Can you introduce us? I think I want to work there. Or they seem like a great team to work with and I'm looking for a new role. And so it's kind of, I'm not yet in a place, I think more of the strategizing I do in Candidly is around fundraising. So a lot of it is like, hey, depending on their situation, every VC hopefully does this, but if the pre-seed didn't work out the way that maybe you wanted, or maybe we're massaging a seed story, there's just always a way to be telling a better story that paints a bigger outcome. In most cases, things are great. So it's just telling the story in the right way. But there's always a way that you've got to, I feel like I'm consistently helping with that around fundraising.
Totally. And I think, just sitting on the VC side is like, what you're looking for in a founder pitch more so than a founder might even know. Right. And so it's like, just telling it in a way where you're going to pique the interest of a VC, right? Because at best you have 2 to 3 minutes to convince them to get on an intro call with you, right? And so it's like, but I like the point that you made about sort of being the middle person in between your founder and portfolio company and being sort of the media presence without divulging too much information about the startup or distracting them in a way, right? So that's interesting. And I also saw recently you posted a video on why you invested in a business as a strategy as well, right? Like you put out a little intro.
Yeah, I'm trying it. I've done 2 on like around 2 fundraising announcements. Part of me is like, is this silly? Do people watch this? And I tried to do it just on X, like, I don't have a YouTube or anything. I don't know. I think TikTok's more productive for video content like that. Like I announce these the same way, but it's less of a history on the business and more around, hey, here's what they're doing. And TikTok feels a little bit like easier. With Twitter, I don't know yet. So again, I'm just trying stuff.
Yeah, I love it. A/B test it, right?
Yes, exactly.
I do that often as well. Fantastic. Well, one final question for you. In November of 2021, and this must have been pre 2,000 followers, maybe you're at 1K, right? You tweeted that you said, can confirm that it is 10x easier to raise $5 million than it is to get to 500 Twitter followers. Do you still believe that?
No, I do not. That was like, that was my first week it went viral. I was like, oh, my phone like broke. I think I had too much time and it took me like over 1,000. I remember that tweet. Oh gosh, no, it's so much harder to raise money. That was such a peak 21 tweet looking back. I didn't know that. Raising 5 million was easy. Raising 20 was very hard. Like I wanted to raise more than 20 and I didn't for a few reasons, but I definitely had bigger goals and it was very humbling. It is not easy to raise money. And it's much harder even now than it was last year. And so I have been humbled for sure since I did.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I also think you raised Fund 2 in 2022, right? It took 7 months. So you really were coming off of the peak of the market, right? I think the market turned in March of 2022.
Yep. And that is when I started raising. So I remember closing the anchor and then I had a lot of repeats from that came in for larger checks from 1 and 2. But then I had about 10 million to fill with new relationships. And that was hard because people were like, who are you? What are you doing? Like what is this fund? Also we have no money anymore or we don't think we do. So we need to be careful. And so that took me, I think the first 10 million took like 3 weeks. And then the second took the 6.5 months. So it was, to me, it was very hard. But some people are like, Nicole, that's amazing that you raised 20 and in 7 months. It's so relative, right? Like for me, it was like, wow, this is awful compared to the first one. I wasn't expecting that. But to others, and especially if they're raising more, I think it can take, over a year to do that. So
yeah, absolutely. And you sort of were out in market, I think, debatably at the worst time. Things have rebounded slightly, but you really got it when the market was stalling, I think, in fear of what was to come. So, and plus you did raise, a lot more for Fund 2.
Yes. I feel extremely fortunate. I feel, every day I'm like, it's been almost a year since that's been closed, or actually a year. And every day I'm like, I'm so glad that I did that and closed it, and then could just keep my head down this year and really build the firm and invest in good companies and just think about that. I feel very grateful.
Awesome. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. I learned so much during this conversation, and I definitely realized that more VCs should be on TikTok. Like what I've learned.
For me, I mean,
yeah, but I'm curious to follow along and see how LPs continue to respond to the media presence. And even when you start getting institutionals and start raising that fund 3, if those are the plans that you want, as you grow, how that plays out. But this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to get this out to the audience.
That's awesome, Nicole. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.